And ask anyone who studies these issues, it made it worse. Meaning we need to understand that when you just rip meds, when you rip meds away from people, no. When you rip meds away from people, you actually have to have some kind of fallback that helps them and rehabilitates them. Otherwise, they go to the street to buy street drugs.
Comedian and progressive host Francesca Fiorentini recently appeared on Piers Morgan Uncensored, squaring off against a panel that included the likes of Brian Johnson, a rich guy who's into life extension, MAGA movement's business grifter, Grant Cardone, and Dr. Deborah Birx, who was Trump's coronavirus response coordinator. I like covering these Piers Morgan Uncensored segments because a lot of you have told me you prefer watching them here, so you don't have to boost Piers Morgan's views and clicks. Thanks for that support. Today, we're diving into a discussion featuring Francesca Fiorentini, where she tackles topics around RFK Jr. and healthcare in America. Let's break this down and unpack what went on during this panel.
And by the way, he helped get Donald Trump voted in as a mandate. The country wants change, and it is willing to confront the status quo.
I also think with him, Francesca, there are some, definite disingenuous attempts to misrepresent him. I asked him categorically, is he anti-vaccination, period? He said absolutely not. And in fact, his own kids have been immunized against various things. He's very skeptical, as many people are, about the COVID vaccines, particularly the mRNA vaccines. I was with, for what it's worth, one of the top cancer experts in Britain for lunch a couple of days ago, who was utterly scathing about the long-term impact of the mRNA vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, and says that they're reaping a whirlwind in the world of cancer, for example, as a result of the vaccines. Not to say that I personally believe they saved many lives, but did we have enough time to examine the potential consequences? Almost certainly not. So he's been skeptical about that, but he's not anti-vaccine, as many people like to portray him.
Except that he founded an organization, the Children's Health Defense League, that is straight up against vaccinations. They are selling onesies for babies that says, unvaxxed and unafraid, right? Like, that's what they're doing. They're an anti-vax organization. That's what he has done for decades now. I just want to name, trust me, if we think that ripping people's psychiatric meds away is going to be beneficial for the health of this country, you have another thing coming. We are going to see.
Actually, I do think it's a good idea. Well, hang on.
Drug epidemic.
Hang on.
We're gonna.
No, you hang on. To answer that point, I do. America is ridiculously over-medicated, particularly in the area of antidepressant drugs and anxiety drugs and so on. And Britain's going the same way.
No, I think it's great. I think it's great.
There are millions of young people.
You know what happens?
Hang on, Francesca. Hang on. Don't start shouting.
A private little
don't start shouting.
Let me just finish. You asked
let
me
me put a question to you.
I bet money that Francesca's on drugs right now.
Francesca, let me put a question to you.
Hang on,
guys. Hang on. Can you both please hang on?
What happens is,
Francesca,
rip people's medications away.
Can't stop.
Let me make a point, please. Let me make my point. Let them respond.
I feel like I'm.
I gotta say, I love it when Francesca Fiorentini shows up on these panels to school these clowns like Grant Cardone. Did you catch that exchange? Cardone throws out there, basically accusing her of being on drugs, and Francesca fires back with, "Not nearly enough to deal with your grifting ass." It's gold. This guy Cardone isn't used to being called out like that, and he clearly couldn't handle it.
Everyone stop talking for a moment. Francesca, the point I'm making is America has 80% of the world painkiller consumption. 80%, right? You have millions of don't respond yet, millions of young people who are taking completely unnecessary, mind-bending drugs for things like anxiety, depression, often self-diagnosed. And guess what happens? You then have a load of weirdo, loner kids running around with their brains scrambled who commit mass shootings and stuff like that. There is a direct correlation. And we're going the same way in Britain. Young people are getting massively over-medicated. So I am actually in favor of RFK trying to pull America away from its addiction to mind-bending drugs.
there's a real life example for what happens when you kick people off of painkillers, which I agree. Painkillers were overused, specifically the Sackler family, when it comes to OxyContin, right? We all know this infamous case got millions of people addicted to OxyContin when they didn't need to be on such a heavy opioid, right? And so what happened? Rightfully, doctors started rescinding those scripts, which was good, but then people were already addicted, so they sought painkillers on the black market, which were mostly just heroin, opioids, fentanyl, and whatnot. And ask anyone who studies these issues, it made it worse. Meaning we need to understand that when you just rip meds, when you rip meds away from people, no. When you rip meds away from people, you actually have to have some kind of fallback that helps them and rehabilitates them. Otherwise, they go to the street to buy street drugs. Everybody knows this. It's well proven. But again, what do I know? I'm not trying to hawk supplements. Here's what I'll say.
Can we just go back to talk about the health issues? Because I think I'm really hoping that we can have that discussion, because I think, and I really appreciate you all being open-minded, that he's bringing a new tone to the investigation and really talking about diagnosing disease early. And I love the AI approach. We have reams of data in our electronic medical records, and we're not using them. Data should be used, and we can anonymize it, and we can look at what people's risk factors are, and we can do so much with the information we already have, and we can find solutions. I hear you talk about Texas and the immunization rates there. That issue is in one of our very culturally special groups in West Texas that has had a vaccine exemption for decades. It's in, we all know our Amish and Mennonites have always historically been vaccine hesitant. And I think, so you don't group that situation in Texas with the rest of the country. And let's remember what he said in the hearing. He made it very clear to every mom out there that his children were immunized about childhood vaccines. Yeah. And what we've done wrong in public health is we didn't explain that COVID vaccines were nothing like the childhood vaccines, and that the childhood vaccines, like many of the diseases, you get it once, you don't get it again. And this is getting the children to have that disease without getting the deadly consequences. That is not what the COVID vaccine was designed to do. It wasn't designed to prevent against infection. And if you look at the vaccine hesitancy rates, they've doubled since COVID. So we have to start addressing these things. We can't just ignore them.
And Deborah, let me ask you, Deborah, I mean, given that you were the face of COVID from the Trump presidency at the time, do you share, this doctor who I was with, do you share the concerns about the longer term negative impact of some of the COVID vaccines?
The messenger RNA vaccine should have been rolled out for the people that were at risk for severe disease, because that's what the vaccine was developed for. But when we say that we're following the science and the data, we need to follow the science and the data. And the science and the data said people primarily over 65 or people with significant comorbidities were at risk for severe disease. Those are the individuals that should have been immunized first. And we should have put our science behind our immunization schedule and protected those most at risk. It went into young people in hospitals before it went into our elderly in nursing homes. That is not following the science and the data. So I am all for following the science and the data, but it shouldn't just be a statement. It should be a reality. And when we don't match what we do in public health to the science and the data, that is when we get into trouble. And that's when we start to fracture trust with the American people.
Okay.
All right, let's break this down because it's getting pretty intense on Piers Morgan Uncensored. Francesca Fiorentini is throwing down some serious truth about America being overprescribed, especially with opioids. She calls out the pharmaceutical companies and the Sackler family for pushing millions of unnecessary prescriptions. Meanwhile, Grant Cardone, in classic douchebag fashion, accuses her of wanting everyone on drugs. Obviously, he missed the point because what Francesca is actually talking about is holding big pharma accountable, not handing out drugs like candy. Francesca's also hitting on a crucial point about antidepressants. Sure, maybe there are too many people on them, but who am I to judge? I'm not a doctor. However, these meds can be life-saving for some. It's not just about cutting down prescriptions. It's about making sure those who need these drugs can actually get them. Dr. Birx tried to steer things back to a real conversation about health, which is what Francesca was aiming for. But then you've got the rest of the panel, including Piers Morgan, who just dodge the real issues like health insurance accessibility. I mean, come on. Even with the best insurance, you're still one hospital stay away from bankruptcy. That's the reality for millions of Americans. And don't get me started on the whole personal responsibility angle the right loves to push. Like, sure, eat your veggies, work out, but guess what? Bad stuff happens. Healthy people get sick all the time. It's not always within our control. We need a comprehensive approach that tackles pharmaceuticals, the healthcare system, and yes, even the junk they put in our food. And let's not fool ourselves. Even if RFK Jr. wants to clean up our diet, that's a huge battle against the food industry giants. So what do you think? Are you Team Francesca here? Or do you have a different take? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't yet, and let's keep this conversation going. This is Cole Talk, and I'll catch you in the next video.